Have you ever had the feeling that everyone else was handed a map to life except you? Not a map to success or happiness or even confidence, but something far more difficult to name. The ability to laugh without thinking, to walk into a room without wondering who you should become, to speak in your own voice without rehearsing it first, to make decisions without endlessly asking whether everyone else would approve, to simply belong to yourself. For years, I genuinely believed there was an elusive quality that everyone else possessed. I could see it in the people I admired, in friends, in strangers, in family members, in people who seemed adventurous, funny, kind, intelligent. I thought they had discovered something about life that I hadn't. As though somewhere along the way, everyone else had been given a key, and somehow, mine had gone missing. I didn't know then that I wasn't searching for confidence, that I was actually searching for permission. Permission to take up space, permission to choose joy, permission to live my own life before trying to live everybody else's. A few years ago, I heard my favorite poet David Whyte tell a story that stayed with me. He spoke about being at a gathering and noticing two people standing only a few feet apart. One person's face seemed completely open to the world. The other carried a face that felt closed against it. Nothing dramatic had happened. They were simply just standing there. Yet, he realized that this orientation towards life would shape everything. The person who welcomed the world would receive the world differently. The person who remained closed would experience an entirely different life. When I first heard that story, I understood every word, but I couldn't feel it. Because if I'm honest, I didn't know what it meant to welcome life. I had spent so many years in a shell, looking outward, that I didn't even realize I was turned away from myself. This painting collection began the moment I realized my life belonged to me. The first ordinary moment when I realized something had changed wasn't during some huge achievement. It happened while I was spending 3 weeks with my family this summer. Looking back now, nothing extraordinary happened. No grand breakthrough, no life-changing conversation, just ordinary days. Morning coffees, meals together, walks through the garden, laughing, talking. But somewhere within those ordinary days, I began noticing something extraordinary. For most of my life, I had defined who I was by the people around me. I outsourced their personalities, as though the qualities I admired in them somehow didn't belong to me. Everyone else was always more understanding, kinder, more intelligent, more outgoing, more adventurous, more confident. The people I surrounded myself with slowly became a definition of my own worth. I didn't know it then, but I had been living as though life was happening somewhere else. As though that confidence that I deeply wanted to feel belonged to someone else's story, as though freedom was reserved for other people. When David Whyte spoke about turning your face towards life, I couldn't resonate with it because I wasn't facing life. I was facing everyone else, watching them, comparing, trying to understand what secret they knew that I didn't. I thought if I looked hard enough, observed long enough, I would eventually find the missing piece. I didn't know it then that it was never outside of me. The strange thing about transformation is that it rarely announces itself. There wasn't a moment where I woke up and declared, I am confident now. Instead, it arrived quietly. It came in the way I spoke my honest opinions without worrying whether someone would be upset. It came in the way I looked after my body, taking myself to the gym, choosing movement, choosing strength. Not because I wanted to become somebody else, but because I had finally started caring for the person who was already here. It came in the way I laughed, the way I walked into a room, the way I caught myself talking to random strangers, making jokes, asking questions. Instead of being wrapped inside my own head with the same old stories, I found myself looking outward at the world as though I had been given a new pair of eyes. Instead of feeling closed, I felt open to life. I love seeing even now how, when the sun hits like the base colors, like how it's starting to like glow from within. And this is the messy stage. And I always remind myself in this stage that, you have to see the vision. Like I have to see the vision for what this painting is going to become. And every time, I have this source image that I've created that I'm following from. But I always find that, when I paint, that is an image, right? And it has soul, but I always feel like the painting has so much soul because every brushstroke, every sort of color choice, and even how I make maybe a mark by accident, it changes almost the whole expression of the face. That brings so much sort of depth and emotion and atmosphere to the painting. And I was doing this and I created this little sort of mark just on her face by accident. And all of a sudden she seemed like she was smiling even more, looking hopeful even more. And little sort of experiences like that when I'm on the canvas just makes me feel so happy, and it motivates me to keep going. But yes, this is the messy stage. This is the stage where I have to have the most faith and trust that it will become a beautiful painting. If the woman I was 2 years ago met me today, I don't think she'd be surprised by my paintings or my studio or even this collection. I think she'd be surprised by something much deeper. She'd be surprised to discover that I'd finally included myself. Not in a selfish way, not by loving other people less, simply by no longer leaving myself out. I finally understood where my boundaries stood. I stopped endlessly pouring from an empty cup and began filling my own cup first. I stopped believing everybody else's life deserved to be lived before mine. 2 years ago, my attention flowed outward first. What do they need? What do they think? Are they okay? Am I enough? Should I make myself smaller? But somewhere, almost without me noticing, my attention began coming home. What do I need? How do I feel? What matters to me? What kind of day do I want? What would be kind to myself? 2 years ago, I would have believed someone else could live their dream, but not mine. I would have celebrated someone else's adventure, while quietly convincing myself I didn't belong in one. For someone who has spent so much of her life living for other people, this felt like a revolution. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was just free. Maybe it was the heat of the summer. Maybe it was spending months quietly painting in my studio thinking I'd become a recluse, when really, those long hours had been changing me little by little into someone who would take care of herself, into someone who would pour her time and attention and energy into her dream. I don't know exactly why it happened. All I know is that somehow, the cage I didn't know I was in finally broke open. I don't think this collection began in my studio. I think it had already begun weeks before I ever picked up the paintbrush. Actually, I think it began in my mom's garden. I remember her telling me while she was living with me during her divorce. She said, "You know, I had always dreamed about growing my own garden that's wild and beautiful and full of so many plants. But every time I think about that dream, I didn't actually think it would come to life." Now, a few years forward from that moment, when I stood in her garden this summer, surrounded by the many beautiful and wild flowers she planted herself, I realized we weren't only talking about flowers. We were talking about permission, about dreams that quietly wait until we're finally ready to believe that they belong to us. This summer, I came home feeling rested, well fed by my mum. Not just by food, but by beauty, by stillness, by possibility. Then, a few weeks later, my husband and I watched Tomorrowland together from our living room. We weren't standing in Belgium surrounded by thousands of people. In fact, we were dancing barefoot in our own house, listening to Armin van Buuren, David Guetta, laughing, throwing our hands up in the air without once wishing we were somewhere else. Joy existed in that moment, and for the first time in my life, I took it for myself. This year's Tomorrowland stage was called Conscientia. It looked like an ancient civilization slowly waking up. Monumental human faces emerged from stone cracked open, surrounded by flowers, birds, gardens, floating clouds, staircases leading somewhere unknown. Nature wasn't decorating the architecture. Nature was becoming the architecture, and I couldn't stop looking at it. It was spectacular, but more so, it felt strangely familiar. It looked like what had been happening inside me, almost as though the old version of myself that hadn't broken apart, she had broken open. Looking back now, I don't think I was gathering inspiration. I think inspiration was gathering me. My mum's garden, Tomorrowland, my own internal shift. None of them knew about one another, yet somehow they were all telling the same story. This collection doesn't begin with answers. It begins from me with questions. What conditions allow life to bloom inside a woman? What happens when she finally becomes deeply rooted in herself? What parts of us begin to grow once fear is no longer doing all of the gardening? What are the different ways of saying yes to life? As I paint each woman, I don't feel like I'm inventing her. I feel like I'm meeting her. Each painting seems to know something I don't yet understand. Each one asks another question, and each one reveals another answer. When I look at this first painting now, at first I thought I saw confidence, but now I don't see confidence. I see a woman listening. Her face isn't looking at something, it's turned toward something, almost as though she's heard life calling her name, and for the first time, she's answering. The flowers, they don't feel like decoration. They feel as though they're emerging from within her. They tell the story of the winter that came before it. The ferns rising through her body feels like something ancient has finally found that courage to grow. She's becoming someone who finally belongs to herself. This collection is an exploration of what happens when a woman stops living as though everyone else has the permission to bloom first, and begins tending the life that has quietly been asking her for her attention all along. If you'd like to follow along as the collection unfolds, be the first to see what I'm creating inside my tiny art studio, hear the stories behind each painting, receive private studio letters along the way, I'd love for you to join my collector list. You'll also get first access to my new collections before they're released publicly. And I'm also doing something that I've wanted to do for a while. When we reach our first 100 collectors, I'm going to gift one person on the list an original painting from me. So if you'd like to come along from the beginning of this collection, you can join the collector list. The link to join is in the description box below. If I could say one thing to the version of myself from 2 years ago, I'd simply tell her this. Every part of life already exists within you. There will come a time when the elusive quality of confidence you've seen in everyone else will finally find a space within you too. Not because you're pretending, but because you'll become deeply rooted in yourself. You'll laugh in your own voice, move in your own way, welcome the world and everything within it.